Brother mocked my tech career at Easter, then Grandma dropped this bombshell. Easter dinner last year was where it all went down. My brother decided to put on a little performance, which honestly wasn't anything new. But before I dive into all that, let me say this, I've noticed the channel's been slowing down a bit lately. If you're here and you like these stories, hitting that subscribe button is the easiest way to show support. It's fast, it's free, and it really helps keep this community growing strong. Caleb, my older brother, has always been the loudest one in any room, like he was born with a built-in megaphone and a need to dominate every conversation. Since we were kids, he carried himself like the chosen one, acting like solving a Rubik's Cube in record time during middle school somehow guaranteed him a ticket to greatness. He held onto that ego like it was a championship trophy and dragged it right into adulthood. After college, he jumped headfirst into the tech world, startups, software engineering gigs, fancy job titles, and every time you talked to him, he was dropping names of founders or CEOs like they were close friends. And to be fair, he was actually good at what he did, smart, driven, capable, but man, he was even better at constantly reminding the rest of us just how good he was. I took a different route. My path was a lot quieter. I majored in business analytics and slowly worked my way up in the field of enterprise strategy. No fancy job titles, no viral success stories, but I stuck with it, kept my head down, and worked hard. By the time I turned 29, I was managing strategic acquisitions at a mid-sized tech company that was growing fast. Now, the difference between me and Caleb? I didn't feel the need to announce every accomplishment like I was writing my own LinkedIn article. That Easter, we were all packed into my parents' house, Grandma, a bunch of cousins, our younger siblings, and Caleb's new girlfriend at the time. I think her name was Savannah. Or maybe Belle. Something like that. She had one of those laughs that sounded like it came from a cartoon and held onto her phone like she was waiting for it to give her directions on how to socialize. The wine was flowing freely, the ham had been cooked into a dry mess, and the backhanded remarks started flying before we'd even reached the salad course. I was sitting next to Grandma, chatting with her about this book club we'd both joined, when Caleb, with his usual sense of dramatic timing, leaned back in his chair and said loud enough for the whole table to hear, "Not everyone can handle a real career in tech. Some people just hang around the edges and call it strategy." He didn't need to say my name, everyone knew exactly who he meant. There was this tiny pause, barely a beat, but long enough for the jab to sink in. Savannah let out a squeal like it was the funniest thing she'd ever heard. Mom gave this nervous chuckle, like she was trying to smooth things over without getting involved. Dad just kept staring at his plate like maybe his green beans were going to offer him a way out. And me? I just smiled. Because by that point in my life, I'd gotten pretty used to Caleb tossing around digs like that. But Grandma, God love that woman, put down her fork, turned to me with this calm, steady look that only someone who's seen a lifetime of nonsense can pull off, and asked, "Is that why your company just bought his and laid him off?" You could have heard a pin drop. The silence hit like a wall. Caleb's smirk wobbled just a little. Savannah's phone dipped a couple inches, like her fingers forgot what they were doing. Mom blinked slowly, like she couldn't quite process what she'd just heard. See, what Caleb didn't know, and what I hadn't bothered to mention, because I wasn't trying to show off, was that my company had just completed the acquisition of the startup he worked for. And I wasn't just some random guy in the background, I was the lead on that strategic deal. I'd personally reviewed their product strategy, crunched the risk assessments, combed through the team evaluations, and signed off on every detail in the agreement. And yeah, Caleb's name showed up in one of those internal audits. Let's just say it didn't exactly sing his praises. I didn't answer Grandma right away. I just let the silence settle in a little longer. I took a slow sip of wine and said calmly, "We're really looking forward to the integration." Grandma just smiled, nodded, and went right back to her plate like she hadn't just dropped a verbal nuke on the table. Dad coughed, probably trying to mask a laugh. And Caleb? He turned the color of a ripe tomato and mumbled something about how the deal was still in early stages, how it didn't really mean much. But it did. From that point on, he hardly said a word for the rest of dinner. And for once, I didn't feel like I was stuck standing in the shadows of his spotlight. I felt like the quiet storm that had been building for years while he pranced around, thinking the sun would always shine on him. The next few weeks were awkward, to say the least. Caleb never called or texted. Mom did, though. She rang me up and asked if I really had to rub it in like that. I told her I hadn't said anything, it was Grandma. But the truth is, it wasn't really about that one night. It was about everything that came before it. All the years I'd spent being told I lacked ambition. That my work was just corporate fluff while he was out there changing the world. All those lectures about how I'd never be taken seriously unless I learned to code. The way he always brushed me off because I didn't feel the need to post a LinkedIn status every time I opened an Excel doc. He treated me like I was playing dress up in the business world. But that acquisition? That wasn't luck. It was the result of months of grinding, late-night meetings, strategic planning, executive reviews, internal memos, and revision after revision. And when I saw his name on the list of employees from the company we were acquiring, I didn't flinch. I didn't give him a heads up. I didn't try to soften the blow. I didn't alter a single detail. Because while business isn't personal, sometimes it has a way of writing the most poetic endings. A week after the acquisition was publicly announced, I got an email from Caleb. It was stiff. Super formal. You could almost hear the tension in the phrasing. "Hi. I hope you're doing well. I was wondering if we could meet up for coffee sometime. I'd really appreciate your insight on the new structure and possible career transitions." That last line, career transitions, I read it twice. I already knew from HR that he wasn't staying in his current role. His team had been underperforming for more than a year, and the CTO had already flagged a bunch of roles that were considered redundant. Caleb's job was one of them. I didn't respond right away, not to be cold, but because I needed to think. This was the same guy who once told my high school boyfriend that I was too emotional to survive corporate life. The same brother who swiped the last dinner roll off my plate when we were 12 just to prove some weird, pointless point. The same brother who used to tell our entire extended family that I worked in corporate decoration. But despite all that, he was still my brother. So yeah, I met up with him. We sat down at this quiet little cafe a couple blocks from my office. He looked tired. Not just physically, like something inside him had finally cracked. Gone was that usual cocky posture, the smug smirk, the casual arrogance. He looked like someone who had just realized he'd spent years climbing the wrong ladder. He tried to make small talk at first, but it didn't go far. It just sort of fizzled out. Then he said, "So, I guess congratulations are in order." I gave a small nod. "Thanks." And then he asked something I never expected. "How did you do it?" There was no edge in his voice. No bitterness. Just curiosity, and maybe, just a hint of actual respect. It was the first genuine conversation we'd had in, well, years. So I told him the truth. I said it took patience, a ton of focus, and most of all, learning when to shut up and really listen. I told him I'd worked quietly, steadily, and when I finally spoke up, it mattered, because I wasn't just making noise. I wasn't trying to impress anyone. I had something to say, and people listened. He nodded slowly, taking it all in. Then he asked if I thought there might be a place for him somewhere in the new company structure. I didn't promise anything. I told him if he was serious, really serious, about learning, adapting, and being part of something bigger than just himself, then maybe there could be a spot. But I also told him he'd have to go through the internal application process like everyone else. No favors, no shortcuts. He nodded again. And when we walked out of that cafe, he didn't try to hug me or anything like that. But he did say thanks. That night, Grandma gave me a call. She never talks about family drama, but all she said was, "You handled that well." And honestly, that meant more to me than anything else. She said, "I always knew which one of you really held the power." And for the first time in a long while, I felt seen not as Caleb's little sister, not as the quiet one who stayed out of the spotlight, but as someone who had actually built something. Something solid. Something worth respecting. Of course, in my family, peace never lasts. Just when I thought Caleb might finally be learning some humility, maybe even heading in the right direction, something happened that flipped everything on its head. And it all began with a single forwarded email. 2 weeks after our coffee meetup, I'd finally found some peace. I wasn't expecting Caleb to completely reinvent himself overnight or suddenly become a model of self-awareness. But I had seen a flicker of change in him, and honestly, I started to hope, just a little, that maybe this could be the beginning of a more equal relationship. Maybe we'd finally talk like adults, like siblings on the same playing field. Then the email landed in my inbox. It came from our internal hiring team. Subject line, Strategic Career Pitch, Caleb Foster. I opened it on a Tuesday morning, halfway through my third cup of coffee, expecting a standard resume or maybe a short follow-up. Instead, I got 5 paragraphs that felt more like a self-congratulatory memoir than a job inquiry. In the email, Caleb didn't introduce himself as someone looking for a new opportunity after a layoff. No, he painted himself as a bold innovator in the tech world, a visionary who could restructure leadership and elevate the company's so-called innovation DNA. He tossed around corporate buzzwords like confetti, synergy, paradigm shift, value extraction, to the point where I actually felt embarrassed for him. But what really hit me in the gut was one particular line. He wrote, "Given my deep understanding of both the acquisition process and the company's internal workings, I believe I'm uniquely positioned to work directly with executive leadership, including my sister, who, while talented, has mainly focused on numbers rather than vision." I stared at that sentence for a long time, reread it at least 3 times. At first, I wasn't even angry, just stunned. After everything, he was still doing this. Still trying to frame himself as the genius and me as the safe, boring spreadsheet jockey. Even while asking for a job, he couldn't resist taking a shot. I didn't reply. I flagged the email and set up a meeting with our HR liaison and the VP of operations, both of whom had final authority on hiring decisions for the new structure. After reading it, the VP looked at me and asked carefully, "Do you want us to bring him in for an interview?" I shook my head. "No. I just wanted you to see it. If he applies through the proper channels, treat him like you would anyone else. But if he tries to use my name again, I want it brought straight to me." They both nodded. They understood the subtext. I wasn't handing out favors, but I also wasn't going to let him snake his way into a role he hadn't earned. I figured that would be the end of it. It wasn't. 3 days later, my mom called. She was upset. Caleb had apparently told her I was blocking his chances of being rehired. That I was using my position to punish him for being successful. I nearly dropped the phone. "Mom," I said, keeping my voice steady, "I haven't done a thing to sabotage Caleb. All I did was not let him lie his way into a job he's not qualified for." I told her about the email, how he had the nerve to suggest I was all numbers and no vision. I asked, "Do you seriously think that's how you land a job?" She didn't answer. She just muttered something vague about how family should stick together. That's when it hit me. No matter how far I came, no matter how hard I worked or what I achieved, Caleb would always be Caleb. And my parents? They'd always be his safety net. But I wasn't 12 anymore. I wasn't going to keep bending myself into shapes they approved of just to get some kind of recognition. So I told her straight. I'm not your son's backup plan. I've worked too damn hard to build what I have. If Caleb wants a role here, he needs to earn it. Just like everybody else. She didn't say much after that. Just a tense goodbye before hanging up. That weekend, Grandma stopped by. She brought over a homemade pie, and we sat out on my balcony while I told her everything. She didn't interrupt. Just listened and nodded while I let it all spill out. Then she looked at me and said something I'll never forget. Sometimes, she said, people don't want to see you succeed. They want you to stay small, where they're comfortable seeing you. Beneath them. I asked if that's how it felt raising my mom and uncle. She gave a soft smile, but there was sadness in her eyes. I knew who they were early on, she said. But I also knew I couldn't force them to grow. That part's up to them. And in that quiet moment, with her pie on the table and the breeze moving through the trees, I realized she understood all of it, maybe better than anyone ever had. That Monday, HR reached out to let me know that Caleb had finally submitted a formal application, this time without name-dropping me. I actually exhaled. Like, really exhaled. Maybe, just maybe, he was starting to get it. But then came the interview. And it didn't go well. He talked too much, listened too little, and spent half the time pitching ideas for a department we didn't even have. Oh, and he referred to himself in the third person. Yes, really. The hiring manager told me about it afterward, doing their best not to laugh. At one point, he literally said, what Caleb brings to the table is. We didn't move forward. Obviously. And Caleb? He didn't call. No angry texts. No dramatic LinkedIn posts. No guilt trips sent via family group chat. He just sort of vanished into the background of the tech world for a while, quietly licking his wounds, I assumed. Eventually, word made its way to me that he'd taken on a freelance contract with some early-stage startup in Austin. Back to square one. Except now, he had no safety net. And a bruised ego. Meanwhile, I kept going. That fall, I got promoted to VP of Strategy. Led 2 more acquisitions. Hired 3 new analysts, none of whom were related to me, thank God. And through it all, Grandma stayed in touch. She sent me a handwritten card every time my name showed up in a press release. Then Easter rolled around again. I wasn't planning to go this time. Too much history. Too many awkward silences wrapped in holiday ham. But then Grandma called a week before. Said she was making her famous lemon cake and she wanted me there. And when Grandma says that, you show up. So I did. Caleb was already there when I arrived. Quieter than usual. No girlfriend this time. And when our eyes met across the room, something passed between us. Not animosity. Not arrogance. Something softer. Maybe it was shame. Or finally, understanding. After dinner, while people were stacking plates and Grandma was humming to herself, he came up to me in the kitchen. We stood near the sink, the clink of dishes behind us. I was an ass, he said. No build-up, no deflection. Just those 4 words. I didn't deny it. Didn't need to. But thanks for not making it worse. Still, I didn't say anything, just gave a small nod. That was enough. And then, as if on cue, Grandma passed by carrying her cake dish. She paused, gave us that trademark sly smile, and said, looks like someone finally figured out who's really running the show. And for once, finally, Caleb didn't argue.